The morning at the small-town police station began like any other day. A light mist still clung to the tin roof. And the coffee hadn't even had time to cool. Officer Mars, a former veteran now assigned to protect the residential areas bordering the forest, was reviewing the overnight shift reports. He sat quietly at his desk, eyes slightly weary, focused on an old report that hadn't yet been submitted. Outside, a flock of sparrows had started chirping, bringing with them the familiar, comforting sound of a peaceful morning. Until the station door suddenly swung open. Not because of the wind, and not because a man had walked in, but because of a dog. Its body was covered in mud, the once golden fur now matted with wet dirt, and in its mouth was a tiny puppy, trembling like a small leaf in the middle of a storm. No one had time to react. Mars stood up instinctively. His hand reached toward his belt where his gun was holstered, but stopped. There was no threat, no aggression, only a pair of eyes. Those eyes, belonging to the mother dog, looked at Mars in a way he had never seen before. Not on the battlefield, and not during his patrols. It was the gaze of a soul pleading for help. There was no barking, no hostility, only heavy breathing, exhaustion impossible to hide, and a complete, unspoken trust in the uniformed man standing before her. Mars didn't know what was going on, but he understood, clearly and without the need for explanation. This dog had just come through a nightmare. And she hadn't come alone. Because something in her eyes said she would return. A few minutes after placing the first puppy down in the middle of the duty room, Rex turned around, without pausing for a breath. The mother dog spun and darted back out the door, racing across the station yard like a ghost with a mission. No one could stop her in time. Mars gave chase, but stopped at the threshold. He didn't want to startle the animal. Inside him rose a strange mix of emotions, concern, and admiration. A few younger officers rushed over, finding the little puppy still trembling on the tiled floor. It let out a sharp cry, then wriggled closer, pressing its face into the jacket Mars had just taken off. Its eyes were round, like marbles glistening with tears. "Officer Mars, what's going on?" a female colleague asked softly. Mars just shook his head. "I don't know yet, but she'll come back," he said. She, and no one objected. Because somehow, everyone sensed Rex wasn't just an ordinary dog. There was something intelligent, resolute, and deeply human about her. And just as he said, 11 minutes later, Rex returned, her 4 legs caked with mud, her body more exhausted than before. But in her mouth was another puppy. It didn't cry out, didn't struggle, just dangled limp like a leaf freshly fallen from a branch. The whole room went still. This time, Mars didn't stay frozen. He stepped forward and gently took the puppy into his bare hands, his eyes locking with Rex's as if to say, "I'm here now." And Rex understood. Without fear, she gently released her pup and collapsed beside it, panting heavily. Her tongue hung out long. But after barely a minute's rest, she struggled to rise again. Mars placed a hand on Rex's head. "There's more, isn't there?" Rex looked at him, didn't bark, but her eyes were the answer. And like a mother gathering the final shards of hope, Rex turned once more, running back to wherever she had come from. To save whatever still could be saved. Mars couldn't sit still any longer. The third time Rex left the station, he got into the patrol car, started the engine, and followed her from a distance. The dirt road led out of the small town, cutting through low pine forests and patches of abandoned land. Rex was in the lead, her steps still trembling, but she didn't stop. He kept a safe distance, far enough not to distract her. But his chest was already filled with a sinking feeling. This wasn't just about a litter of abandoned puppies. Near the forest's edge, at a clearing, Rex stopped. She lowered her head and began digging through an old pile of hay. And from underneath, emerged the third puppy, too weak to even cry. Mars immediately stepped out, lifted the pup gently, and wrapped it in a soft towel. But as his eyes swept across the area, a chill ran down his spine. A rusted chain, its imprint still fresh on the ground. A slab of rotting meat placed in a cracked plastic bowl. And a broken metal cage, tilted near a bush, clearly used to confine an animal. Mars cursed under his breath. Damn it. He'd seen things like this before, evidence from dog abuse cases, where animals were trained for brutal, bloody fights. Rex wasn't just a mother. She was a victim, and now, a survivor. As Mars bent down to examine the tracks more closely, he spotted a shallow human footprint pressed into the damp soil, fresh. Not yet blurred by the wind. Someone was still nearby. And possibly watching Rex. Mars cradled the newly rescued puppy inside his jacket, holding it close to his chest. He turned to look at Rex. She stood still, silent, but her ears were perked up, her nose constantly sniffing the air, as if something wasn't right. Then suddenly, a branch snapped sharply in the bushes across the clearing. Mars spun around. He wasn't holding a weapon, but his eyes turned razor sharp. He had been on battlefields before. He'd seen that look before, the look of someone hiding, ready to strike. Rex growled softly in her throat, then suddenly charged toward the bushes, barking in sharp, decisive bursts, not barking out of fear, but as a warning. Mars took a few steps back, eyes following the direction Rex had bolted. A shadow darted out, low and fast. Like a wild animal. Mars shouted, "Stop!" No response, only the sound of a motorcycle revving in the distance, an old engine whining like a ghost screaming in the dark brush. He gritted his teeth and grabbed the radio to report back to the station. "This is Mars. I've discovered signs of animal abuse. Suspect may still be near the western forest edge. Requesting backup. Repeat. Send backup." Rex returned, her eyes carrying a mix of sadness and sharp alertness. At her feet was a torn leather glove, stained with dried blood. Mars crouched down and picked it up. A clue. Not much, but enough to confirm. Someone had been here, and they weren't alone. He looked back at Rex. "Is there more, girl?" Rex turned and started walking in another direction. Her back curved low, but her stride remained strong. She would lead him all the way into hell if she had to. And Mars was ready to follow, because he knew justice isn't only for humans. Rex led the way like a silent warrior. Mars followed closely behind, a tightness growing in his chest with each step. Not from fear, but because he knew, the deeper they went, the darker the truth would become. Beyond a low rocky slope, they reached a sunken patch of land, damp and overgrown with knee-high wild grass. A collapsed fence lay hidden among rotting tree trunks. Inside, the ground was littered with tangled wire mesh and shattered wooden crates. Mars held his breath. A rusted tin shack sat nestled deep within the brush. The lock on its door had been broken. Someone had left, in a hurry. Rex let out a low growl. She didn't enter. She just froze, as if the memories of this place hurt more than any physical wound. Mars knocked lightly on the shack's door. No response. Only a smell. Foul. Metallic. And suffocating. Like a forgotten morgue. He pushed the door open. Light spilled in, revealing the truth. 3 large iron cages, their bars scratched raw by claws. A blood-stained metal bowl, lying next to gnawed remains of bone. And 2 chains still tangled with pale yellow fur. Mars was speechless. He knelt down, touching a carved marking on a wooden beam inside the cage. Rex, scratched in by claw or tooth. Suddenly, tears welled up in his eyes. "She was kept here," he whispered, as if confessing it to himself. Rex stepped softly behind him, placing her paw on the doorway. She wasn't afraid. She just stood there, guarding, watching, staring into the prison that had once held her. Mars stood upright, taking a deep breath. "No one's here now, but the trail is still warm. And we're going to show them that justice can rise from the very place they thought no one cared." Mars stepped into the shack with cautious steps. Amid the chaos, it wasn't the broken cages or rusty chains that caught his eye, but an old metal box, half hidden beneath a moldy tarp in the corner. He pulled it out. A thick cloud of dust rose, making him hold his breath. Inside was a black notebook, its soft leather cover cracked with age. Mars opened it. Inside were hundreds of scribbled lines. Delivery dates, quantities, species names, and client aliases. He flipped through the pages, heartbeat pounding. There were code names, cryptic tags like TX42, Black Wolf, Gray Man, and then Rex, the vicious one. Used for bait training. If she survives, even better. Mars clenched the notebook tightly. His temples throbbed as the blood surged to his head. They had treated her like merchandise. A tool. Rex stepped closer, gently nudging his thigh with her nose. No bark, no growl, but her eyes, amber brown, deep as scorched earth, spoke louder than any word. Don't forget what you saw. Mars took a deep breath and slipped the notebook into his backpack. But he wasn't going to just file it away like a routine report. No, this time, he would take it all the way. He turned back toward the open door, where sunset light bathed the forest in gold. Beams of sun pierced the treetops and lit up Rex's mud-covered back. She stood still, staring into the distance, the direction those men had fled. Mars reached for his radio. But this time, he didn't call the station. He pulled out his phone and dialed a private number, someone from his past, an agent from the Federal Task Force on Animal Crime. This is Officer Mars. I need you here immediately. I've got hard evidence of an illegal dog trafficking and training ring. And it may cross state lines. He paused, then looked down at Rex. And this time, I won't let anyone bury the truth. 2 days later, the sky above the small town turned heavy, as if it could sense something was about to be exposed. 3 unmarked SUVs, caked in red dust, pulled up in front of the police station. Out stepped federal agents from the National Animal Protection Unit, the same team Mars had once worked with, before he withdrew from a case that was never resolved. Now, he was stepping back into that fight. Not for duty, but for a dog named Rex. Inside a sealed briefing room, Mars laid all the evidence out on the table. Photos of animal cages, the blood-stained glove, the black notebook containing transaction records, and photos of Rex when she was found. Emaciated to the bone, yet eyes that had never surrendered. The lead agent, a gray-haired woman named Lana, locked eyes with Mars. Are you sure about this, Mars? If we dig into this network, we may end up uncovering people tied to local authorities. Mars nodded, no hesitation. I don't need anyone taken down. I just need justice for Rex. And for the creatures who never got a voice. Lana held his gaze for a moment, then slowly nodded. Then Rex will be our living witness. That afternoon, Mars brought Rex to the old training compound, a place once used to evaluate abused animals. But this time, it wasn't for an assessment. It was to show everyone. She was not a vicious dog. Not a bait tool. She was proof. A survivor. A spirit that refused to break. Rex stepped into the courtyard under the eyes of dozens, officers, vets, lawyers, reporters. She didn't flinch, didn't tremble. Mars spoke firmly. This is Rex. She was caged, beaten, and used as a training prop for violent dogs. But today, she will do just one thing. Sit. He extended his hand. Rex looked at him, her eyes lit up with trust. Then, with quiet grace, she sat down. The training yard fell silent. Lana's voice cracked as she whispered. That's enough. Less than a week after Rex's quiet demonstration, the vague suspicions that once haunted Mars now unfolded before him like a blood-drawn map. The black notebook he had recovered had become a golden key, unlocking a case that had been buried for years. 23 addresses, 8 organizations, over 50 animals tortured, disappeared, or illegally trained, and more devastating than all of it, some of the coded names in that ledger were ones Mars himself had signed off on during his days as a senior training officer within the system. He hadn't known, but now he did. And once he knew, he couldn't look away. Federal teams launched sweeping raids across multiple states. At some sites, they uncovered electrified cages. At others, cameras used to film survival games, where dogs were pitted against wild animals, then sold and streamed in hidden corners of the web. And in a storage bunker on the outskirts of Oklahoma, they found traces of Rex. Old photographs, a metal ear tag engraved with her ID number, and a scrawled note. Bites like hell, can't be tamed. Signed, RF. A man Mars had once called senior trainer. When Mars read that line, he didn't feel rage. He felt quiet. Beside him, Rex sat silently. She licked his hand, as if to say, you don't need to punish them for me. I'm already free. That night, on the porch, Mars watched Rex curled up at his feet. Her ears flicked softly with every passing breeze. Moonlight bathed the ground in silver patches, weaving through the trees like fragile nets of light. Mars whispered, you forgive them, Rex? Rex didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes and exhaled, softly, peacefully. And in that moment, Mars understood. Justice isn't always a courtroom verdict. Healing isn't about making the guilty infamous. Sometimes, It's simply found in the eyes of a wounded creature that chose to trust again, chose to sit beside you, chose to keep living without carrying hate. 1 month after the case was finally brought to light, Mars stepped through the rusted gate of an old farm on the outskirts of town, in a place long forgotten by time. It used to belong to his grandfather, who raised cattle here, and his grandmother, who once grew lavender by the fence. Now, only cracks remained, weathered wood, and silence. But Mars didn't see ruin. He saw a beginning. With his savings, and a quiet grant from the National Animal Protection Unit, Mars began transforming the land into the sole recovery center for animals. Not just to heal wounds of the body, but the claw marks left deep in the mind. And by his side, every single day, was Rex. She was no longer the frail dog curled beneath a tree. She had become a living emblem of recovery. Each morning, she stood guard at the gate. She walked beside the newcomers, those still trembling with fear, like an older sister who once knew the same darkness. On opening day, it rained. No one came, but Mars didn't despair, because in the middle of that gray, soaking afternoon, an old truck pulled up. A man stepped out, hands clutching a worn leash. Behind him was a massive pit bull, its head covered in scars. The man's voice shook. "I can't keep him anymore. He won't eat, doesn't trust anyone. But I heard about you, about your dog, Rex. And I thought, if anyone can help, maybe it's you." Mars crouched low. He didn't call, didn't force anything. He simply looked into the dog's eyes. And so did Rex. She stepped forward, gently sniffing through the scent of old blood and rain-soaked earth. No barking, no growling, just presence. The pit bull sat down, silent, and Mars nodded. "He can stay. From now on, he's not a tool. He's a being. And he has a home." That night, under the shelter of an old roof, Rex lay beside her new friend. Mars sat at the desk, flipping open the intake ledger. He wrote carefully. Name, Shadow. Status, trusts no one. Date of arrival, the day healing began. One late autumn afternoon, as golden leaves rained like confetti across the old wooden awning, Mars received an email from a small-town journalist in another state. The subject line was simple. "They say there's a dog who learned to forgive. I want to tell that story." He didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked over at Rex, lying next to the new dog, Shadow, her eyes still watchful, but no longer afraid. And then, he nodded. The article was posted on a modest personal blog. No clickbait headline, no flashy media rollout, just a quiet, powerful opening line. "There's a dog named Rex. She was once trained to be a tool of cruelty. But when given freedom, she chose to guard the gates of hope." The post spread like wildfire through dry grass. Photos of Rex, sitting at the gate, lying beside trembling animals, began to circulate on forums, social media, and eventually, national news outlets. Rex, once a nameless dog, became a nationwide symbol of recovery, forgiveness, and the quiet miracle of survival. 1 week later, the center's parking lot could no longer hold the influx of cars. A family brought a puppy they had found abandoned in the forest. A war veteran showed up with a cat he'd rescued after a hurricane. And an 11-year-old girl knocked gently on the center's front door and asked, "Mr. Mars, I heard Rex helps animals who are afraid of people. Do you think maybe she could help me too? Because I'm afraid of people too." Mars couldn't answer. His throat tightened, but Rex walked forward. No bark, no nudge, no movement, except to sit quietly beside the girl. And wait. 4 days later, the center was featured on national television. The anchor closed the segment with these words: "Sometimes, a forgotten dog can save a community that's forgotten how to love." And Rex, who had no idea what a television was, still sat at the gate each morning. Not for fame, not for applause, but because, to her, any soul that trembles out of the darkness deserves to be welcomed with gentle, wordless presence. It was a bitter winter night. No stars in the sky. Only the wind, sighing through the cracked wooden slats of the Animal Recovery Center. Rex lay inside her open enclosure, beside Mars, as she always did. But tonight, she didn't sleep. Her ears perked up. Something was coming. A rusted truck rumbled to a stop outside the gate. Mars stepped out, flashlight in hand, wrapped in a thick coat. He didn't recognize the license plate. But the man who stepped down. Tall. Familiar. So familiar it took Mars's breath away. RF. The one who once trained through cruelty. The man who caged Rex in darkness and called it discipline. Mars gripped the flashlight tightly. But RF didn't approach with arrogance. He knelt. In his hand, an old chain leash, but no animal at the end of it. I didn't come to take anything back. Mars, the man said, voice hoarse. I came to surrender. To myself. Rex stepped from her pen. She halted a few feet from the man. No growl. No bark. Just a long, still gaze. Into the face of the one who had once taken all light from her eyes. Into the past. Mars clenched his fist. Why now? He asked quietly. RF didn't look up. I saw the articles. I read the stories. I saw what I broke, become what now saves others. I didn't come for forgiveness. I just needed Rex to look at me. One last time. Rex took a single step forward. Mars moved instinctively to block her. But she slipped past, light as a breeze. She stopped in front of RF. Head lowered. There was silence. And then, Rex licked his hand. No one spoke. Mars turned away. Not out of anger, but because the tears came too fast to stop. Not because the man deserved it. Not because the past could be erased. But because Rex didn't choose revenge as justice. She chose compassion. RF left in the night. No promises. No pleas. Only a note left in the mailbox. I'm shutting down the old training camp. I'll never train another creature again. I'll spend the rest of my life caring. No one needs to forgive me. But I will live. As if I have been forgiven. Spring had arrived. The sky was high and clear. As if the wind had swept away all sorrow from the earth. Mars sat alone on the old wooden bench. Watching the yard, where animals and people alike had once arrived. Shattered. And then left, with hope. Rex lay at his feet. Her back was grayer now. Her steps slower. But her eyes were still as deep as the day they first met. Under that cold rain, a little girl, once abandoned in the woods, returned to the center, now holding the hands of her adoptive parents. A three-legged dog, once snarling and hiding, now ran freely, just because it could. An old veteran, who once nearly ended his life, now trained therapy dogs for a VA hospital. Mars saw all of it. And then he looked down at Rex, gently cupping her paw like holding a soul. You know, Rex, people think I saved you. But really, you were the one who taught me to believe in miracles. He remembered that first night. Her body fragile, shaking in his arms, the eyes once filled with doubt, slowly shifting into trust. She never spoke, never needed to. Her presence alone had become a story no one could forget. Mars looked around the center, now expanded into 3 wings. A rehabilitation area for abused animals, a human-animal bonding garden, and the newest space, Rex's home, where children who had once been abandoned could come, play, and listen to stories of healing, told by the very creatures who had once been forgotten. One boy hugged Rex and asked, Mr. Mars, how come Miss Rex is so gentle, even after all the hurt? Mars smiled. Because some hearts don't need to beat loudly. They just need to beat in rhythm, with someone else's pain. That night, when the world fell quiet, Mars lit a candle, and placed it beside the first photo he ever took with Rex. Not as a memorial, but as a reminder of the most important thing she ever taught him. No one is too broken to be loved, and no one is too late to be healed. And so, the story of Mars and Rex didn't end. It lived on, in every soul they helped. In every pair of eyes that once held no hope, now learning to believe in the light.